What's going on, family? Dustin here. Just got finished wrapping up another interview episode for Family by Heart. And this one was very special, very meaningful for me. And I was really glad to have Brandon on the episode with me as well to help move some of the conversation along. Not that it needed moved along, but there were a few times that got a little choked up, and it was nice having that extra perspective from Brandon in there. If you know anything about our story, recently, just July last year, our oldest son was diagnosed with autism, and I really didn't know what all that meant, what that all entailed. And again, this season started a little late this year, as I was kind of going through some emotional, mental things and learning more about autism. And the person we had on today, her book really brought things into perspective. And so our guest today was Leigh Merryday Porch. She's the author of the popular autism parenting blog Flappiness Is, and a veteran educator and academic coach with a master's in autism spectrum disorders. She's an advanced certified autism specialist. She provides training in autism awareness for schools, civic organizations, and law enforcement, and is presented at disability-related conventions. Her writing has appeared in Chicken Soup for the Soul, Raising Kids on the Spectrum, the Huffington Post, and the Child Mind Institute. She's also been featured and interviewed in People.com and GoodMorningAmerica.com and on Autism Live and Inside Edition. Her book is The Scenic Route, Embracing the Detours, Roblox, and Unexpected Joys of Raising an Autistic Child. This book has been my Bible. This book has been so meaningful and powerful. It's made me break down. It's also built me up, helped me realize how much I really need to do, not only for my son, but for other autistic people. And today, as we recorded, is actually Autism Awareness Day, but really Autism Awareness Month is the month of April. So it was an honor to have her on today when we recorded this episode and get a chance to talk to her. Huge takeaway for me is that she wrote this book in the beginning of the pandemic. She had both her kids home, one of them very high special needs, while her husband was traveling a lot. So she wrote this book, was doing her teaching through online classes and having both her kids home. So we can certainly be capable of doing more ourselves if she's able to write such a beautiful book during that time. And Brandon, his big takeaway was he asked her a question about the importance of getting a diagnosis of your child being on the spectrum. And it was just a beautiful episode, beautiful conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to let you hear our interview with Leigh Merryday Porch, author of The Scenic Route, however you want to say it, author of The Scenic Route, and the owner of the blog Flappiness Is. So without further ado, enjoy our conversation. What's going on, family? Welcome to another episode of Family by Heart. We got another interview episode, but first, Brandon, what's going on, man? How you doing today?
Oh, living the dream, man. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I am super, super excited. As you saw before we started rolling for today's episode for this interview, I even started getting a little emotional. And I'm sure it will happen again because this means a lot. So our guest today is the writer and creator of the blog Flappinesses and author of The Scenic Route, Embracing the Detours, Roblox, and Unexpected Joys of Raising an Autistic Child. The author is the wonderful Leigh Merryday Porch. Leigh, how are you today? Thank you so much for being here.
I'm doing well, thank you. Doing just fine after a couple of weeks of back and forth sickness here in my house.
Mm.
It's we've been dealing with that up here in Ohio. We've the weather has been changing. It's we've had a few fall springs that I've had to educate my kids about, and they think spring and summer is coming. I'm like, hold up, snow is still coming, buddy. Snow is still coming. And so with the weather changing like that, we've had a few runs of
Yep.
illness going in our house. How about you, Brandon?
We, knock on wood, have been lucky enough to kind of avoid that. But as far as the fall springs and everything like that, when Dustin and I met up last week, I was getting gas to mow my grass, and so my fall spring has been doing yard work already prematurely. But we've avoided all sicknesses so far, so we'll take that.
Uh, Well, you got your yard mowed, and then yet it's been raining since, and I didn't get around to scooping our backyard like I kind of had hoped to, but
Yeah,
it is what it is. But
it is what it is.
Leigh, meanwhile, is down in northern Florida, so she's kind of got the best weather out of us in terms of just a little bit warmer. But again, sounds like you guys still had a little bit of illness. What was it? Like strep or what's been going around down there in Florida?
All of the above. I mean, I speak to people in all 50 states every day of the week, and I'm telling you, every single student who picks up the phone is also sick. So the whole world's sick right
Yeah.
now, coughing and everything. So yeah, my husband had to get on some antibiotics and that sort of thing, but we're healing.
There
A
you go.
resilient group, right? A resilient group.
Yeah,
Could be worse. It could
that's
be a
right.
pandemic going on right now. Knock
That's
on wood. There.
absolutely true. That's
Yeah.
absolutely true. Funny that we now have that to compare it to.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think we got a couple icebreakers that we like to start each episode off with. So what we got today, Brandon?
So, Leigh, what is one way that the people that are closest to you would describe you first? And then second, what is some hobby, guilty pleasure, something like that that is interesting about you that people may not assume that you are willing to share with everybody?
Okay. Um, what most people would say about me. Um, my friends tell me that they think that I'm kind. Um, and almost everyone who knows me well would say that I'm insatiably curious. I tend to I drop into rabbit holes on the internet and in books and in interests and things like that very, very easily. Um, as far as a guilty pleasure, one that not everyone would expect from me, I am an ASMR watcher,
Okay.
but I am not a cheesy ASMR watcher. You can't be like, click, 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 none of that
No.
fake stuff. I want to see somebody there in the British Museum carefully restoring like some,
Mm.
500-year-old king's, wardrobe or something like that. Those are the kinds of things. And it just, like Bob Ross, it just knocks me right
Wow.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was the little kid in the 70s who, when Bob Ross would come on, would come flying into the living room with a blanket and just sit there and, you know, do the ASMR thing.
So, with your going down rabbit holes, are you like a master of trivia and stuff like that? Like, could you go to a trivia night and kind of clean house?
I'm not bad. I've won a few games of trivia with a random fact or two. I was a school librarian before, well, I taught English for 5 years and then I was a school librarian for 14 years.
Okay.
So I've come across a lot of weird, knowledge. Yeah, occasionally I do know some, but it tends to be very I may go down a rabbit hole if I want to learn everything about wine, for a month or two. Or then, when I read that book, oh gosh, the serial killer, Light City. Oh gosh, I'm trying to think of the name of it. But it was about the serial killer H.H. Holmes and the Chicago World's Fair of 1893. Well,
Hmm.
the next thing I knew, I was reading books about this amazing undertaking that they put together, the Chicago World's Fair. And I have antique prints and things hanging around my house. And yeah, so I have a little bit of a dorky side for sure.
So when you go down that rabbit hole, you go all the way down it.
All the way. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
All
It,
right.
it,
All
it's, yeah. And then I want to take other people with me. And
right.
this is the part of me that I am positive. There's a test that you can take. You can take it on the internet and you can take it in your doctor's office because it's the same one they'll hand you. And it's called the Autism Quotient Test. And it will place you somewhere on what they call the spectrum. And I believe the numbers, it's been a long time since I looked at it, but I believe if you're under 25, you're pretty typical. If you are 75 or older, yeah, you're looking pretty autistic. And everything in between, I always score a 50 on that. And one of the features of autism is restricted and repetitive either
Mhm.
behaviors or interests. So I always think that, like, even though I'm not autistic, that I sit on the fence between the two, overlooking, kind of
It's a good
seeing
place
a
to
little
be.
bit, and I can kind of get it. But I
Hmm.
have that little tendency. I know my little apples did not fall far from the tree.
Okay.
Well, and you say repeated behaviors is one of the characteristics, the fact that you keep taking the test too to see where you fall, see if you've changed anywhere. It's like,
I
am I
have.
more now or am I less? What is
I think
that's
I've
kind
taken the whole thing 3 times over the
of okay.
past 20 years or so. So,
Okay.
yeah, that's absolutely true.
Good. Good. All right, Dustin. Ice broken.
All right. Well, it is in the book, but how did you come up with the name for your blog, Flappinesses? Because I know it's an endearing way of looking at Callum and his behavior, your son Callum, and one of the characteristics or one of the first things you noticed him doing, and of course it's been on the old adage of happiness is. So,
Yeah.
not to give away too much of the adage, if you could tell us how you came up with the name of the blog and what made you even start the blog to begin with.
It was the same thing that every person out there with a little bit of a writer's bent and they suddenly find themselves in a new situation. That's all I was trying to do was I wanted to maybe find some readers, maybe a group of about 30 of them that I could talk to and get some resources from and that sort of thing. Autism had already been in my family,
Mm-hmm.
but I was wanting to emote. And everybody, so many people do this all the time. There are umpteen millions of them all over the internet. I did not expect that the very second post would hit like it did. And then I really suddenly had to scramble and come up with names and like go and get all of my Twitter lined up and all of that, when I was doing Twitter and that sort of thing, go and get all that lined up. But I didn't want anything that referred to puzzle pieces. I already knew that a lot of actually autistic individuals find that somewhat insulting. Their response is, I am not a puzzle to be solved. I am a human being. I do not wish to be referred to as a puzzle. I did not choose that image. And they prefer images that look more like the spectrum or multicolor things that represent a spectrum, the sort of infinity type of link, that
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing. And so I didn't want to have that, mom in a puzzle kind of
Mhm.
thing. And I also didn't want it to be all about grief because so many bloggers and vloggers and writers out there are talking about all the grief they had over this. And I just was determined that I was not going to grieve his life. So I wanted something joyful. And there's just about nothing as joyful as watching a little autist looking off at something and, flapping away joyfully. They're in their zone, they're in their happy place. And as an introvert and somewhat questionably, neurodiverse myself, I get that happy place. And so I wanted, that's exactly what I was going for, was happiness is, but flappiness is. And that can mean, of course, things that are not happy. Because it just is. It's just life.
I love that. And you brought up the term actually autistic. I know that's a hashtag. And then the fact that the puzzle piece is kind of, I'd say, falling popularity. It's not quite the way that people are wanting to look at it anymore. It's not used as a graphic as much. And then you actually mentioned in your book as well that the idea of the spectrum is kind of losing popularity, or that's even kind of changing. So can you explain maybe like the different levels of autism, what actually autistic is, and maybe what the more current terminology would be as far as like puzzle or spectrum, or what we can typically go with? Because I've made a post probably within the last 2-3 weeks referring to spectrum, and then I'm like still getting towards the end of your book, and I'm like, oh, spectrum is not quite the terminology it's being used more. But if you could kind of elaborate on that.
It's not frowned upon. You're not going to get dirty looks from anybody who is an autist, I don't think, in the community. They, there are some brilliant people out there on the autism spectrum, and they come up with various representations of ways to describe themselves. But the autism is part of a spectrum of what essentially neurodiversity, some way in which a child neurologically formed differently in the brain, and that can cause them to think differently, behave differently, perceive differently. It isn't just autism that represents that is a part of neurodiversity. So is ADD, ADHD, your OCD, all kinds of things like that they touch and they overlap and they weave within one another. Doesn't mean that you have to be autistic if you have ADHD, but there are so many that cross over, and even among conditions that would seem unrelated. For example, autism is highly represented in the Down syndrome community. Autism can also be found with specific mental disabilities. I don't say that because I want to stress that the last thing I want to do is convince anyone that someone who is autistic is necessarily intellectually disabled or is dangerously mentally ill in some way, because that's just a small percentage. And that's represented in my family. My daughter is 16 years old. She has a fairly high IQ. We didn't know she was autistic for quite some time. And she's a female. And females, they tend to behave a little bit differently with autism. They tend to not be noticed as easily and diagnosed early on. My son was significantly language impaired and cognitively disabled. He would be on the profound end of intellectual disability. He's walking and he's smiling and he puts on his shoes and he goes places and he loves people and he likes to watch his videos on his stuff, but he can't take a key and open a door. He can't. I don't see how he could have any perception of death at this point. He hasn't lost someone yet, even lost a pet. So he has this very, Callum is in the moment all the time. And both of them are very sensitive to, they have a lot of sensory deficits, such as bright light, loud sounds, background noises. With autism, what happens is, and this is a very simplistic way of describing it, there have been some wonderful simulations that have been done on YouTube by actually autistic people of what it sounds like to be autistic in a restaurant or walking down a street. And they will open your eyes. But they, the sound of the fan going in the background can be the same sound as somebody talking, which is the same sound as maybe a baby crying in the distance. And then a plate drops, 10 feet over, and it's all coming together almost at the same volume with no ability to to sort it out and decipher what is what. And that's what leads to the emotional overwhelm and the physical overwhelm that can occur. Is the sensory integration part that goes with it. So yeah, it is a neurodevelopmental difference, disorder. I think in my son's case, you'd have to call it a disorder. He can't care for himself. He loves life and he is a joy and we adore him and he's funny, but he can't ever be left alone outside of his own, bedroom. And he never will be able to be. So I have to consider that a disorder. In my daughter, it has impacted a great deal of her social skills. She's sweet, she's friendly, people like her. And she's the first one to say, well, I'm autistic. I mean, she owns it. But she could care for herself, and it's just a completely different situation. With her, it's more of a difference. Although she would also be the first one to tell you things are much harder for me than they are. She'll say that a lot. So just because somebody is on the more intelligent in terms, end, if people are looking at ends of a spectrum, just because they have high intelligence doesn't mean that they aren't greatly impacted. And just because somebody is greatly cognitively impacted doesn't mean that they aren't affectionate and outgoing and all of those things. They are truly a spectrum of all different lights and intensities.
One of the reasons you're on here, Leigh, I couldn't picture a better way to describe that. Like, that's very well said.
I'm going to pull this out, and this is probably going to be a terrible mistake because this is an idea I've been working on and I haven't solidified it yet, but okay. Hold on, let me grab this thing.
Absolutely. I like it. We're first exposure. You're seeing it here first.
I've been in a lot of situations where, I'm making a decision and usually when I say, yeah, this probably isn't a good idea, it's never a good idea.
Well, we're going to trust Leigh on this one. She wrote a book. What have you and I done? I mean, come on.
Exactly.
So let me back up here a little bit so you can see this. This is color represented by what forms it and how you perceive it, from hue, which is the color itself, purple, red, green, to tones, which have to do with how much gray is added, and then lightness, which is how much white is added versus how much black is added. And if you look, I don't know if you guys can see inside this, but you've got the hue, and as it's going toward the center, gray is being added, but as it goes up higher, light is here. And I think of autism as each person is this entire wheel, and maybe this represents creativity in the drawing arts. And somebody has got full color, full saturation right here. They're heavy in it. Whereas I'm probably way back here with this kind of celery looking color, a few behind it. I don't have that talent. And then, how intensely is that person into that thing? Well, they may only do that thing on a very light level, but then they may be truly an artiste down here. And to me, it's all very multi-dimensional than it is just going across a piece of a strip of paper, a spectrum like that. And I think that if we were looking at people, that would be a whole lot more like what a human mind would represent and explain who we are.
See, she pulled it off. That was so well done. Like, if you're listening, you have to make sure you go to the YouTube or Spotify video podcast to watch it, because that is definitely a great diagram or diorama, whatever you want to call it. You're still in education. I'm not, like, as far as what to call that model there. My first thought was being doing paint jobs on the side. I'm like, okay, can Sherwin Williams get me one of those so I can take that to people's homes so they could choose the right paint colors? But that's
my artist friends love this. Give me this.
Yeah.
And I got this from, it's a company in Europe, SciArt, and they are the ones that do a lot of color analysis and work with Pantone and I think all that kind of stuff.
I love
but
that.
I saw it in a video from overseas, and I was like, what is that thing? I must have it. And every now and then I play with it. I keep trying to play with words to try to make it fit, but I don't know, maybe it won't in the end completely fit, but that's how I see it.
No, I love that. The description of explaining where you were with someone with the color, and the darker it is, the more you described it beautifully. That was awesome. And I think my son would love it as well, but I think it would probably be destroyed within 5 minutes of him having it. But he's 4, so
they're very fun.
We'll give him a little bit of a leeway there with that. So I'll order a couple, just have some on back order. But no, that's awesome. I love that. Now, you mentioned you worked in the education system in the past, as well as having the autistic, I guess, gene, you would say, having some prevalence in your family, or there's some history of autism in your family. How much did your experience at home and writing your blog, how much did that contribute to you actually writing the book, and as well as becoming an advanced certified autism specialist? And how many times in your life at home did you get close to saying, like, oh my gosh, this is too much. I have too much going home with Callum and everything else going on at home. They said, this is too much. I can't go any further. Or do you feel like that fueled you even more, that, you know what, I need to get this. I want to help other people? Because one of your chapters in the book also mentioned, like, don't wait around for other people's to create that intervention, that thing that you need. Do it yourself. Do it now. So how much did all that contribute to you writing the book and getting that specialist certification?
I've always been a writer at heart, I mean, but with autism, it was suddenly as though I could focus on what it was that I did best, which was I was a teacher. And as a teacher, you have somewhat of a talent, hopefully, in explaining things and sometimes inspiring things. And it seemed to be the only thing that I knew how to do that I could give back. I don't want to mess with a lot of fundraisers or money. I'm not somebody who wants to jump into a car in July in Florida and make a long trek up to Tallahassee and go beg people who may or may not listen for, what I hope that they would do. But what I kept experiencing, because I was still a teacher, was I was seeing all the children previously who I sort of always knew. I mean, if you've lived around it and you've been related to people that have it or loved, someone's child that has it, you do develop a little bit of an eye to spot some of those kinds of behaviors. So I started noticing the children in school that there was no diagnosis. And I could tell the parent had no clue. And I could see this was middle school. I mean, if you're ever going to suffer, you're going to suffer in middle school. And I was seeing this, and I was opening up my library every lunch to these kids who, represented what others called the weirdos, or the, she just wants to be by herself, or, that sort of thing. But they wanted a safe place to go. And I started having them down to the library, and then their parents would sometimes stop by. And then I started getting phone calls because I had reached out in my district wanting to do some training, that after a while that got to be fairly friendly, and then school district folks would send someone my way. And I think the teacher instinct is just, you have to. If you know that they don't know something and you know where they need to go, then you're going to talk to them. As for how the book came about, I had been doing some speaking things. I'd gone to a convention or two. But the book came along. It was a distant dream. I certainly had thought about it. It had been suggested to me, but I didn't hit the pavement like a lot of people did. I wrote a post, and that post overnight went viral enough to get the attention of folks at People magazine. And a reporter reached out to me, did an article, and then it was Good Morning America. Oh gosh, it's been a few years now, I'm forgetting. Inside Edition. And then here I am, I'm sitting here talking to students one day. I had a tech problem, I had IT on the phone. Look, and there's a message on my Facebook from a lead editor at Random House Books. And that was the question they asked me. We just wanted to know if you would be interested in writing a book for us. And well, that was a no-brainer right there. Yes, yes. I had no idea what the book was going to be, but I certainly knew that it was going to have to be a book for parents to try to lead them out of this sense of devastation that can take over when you really know nothing about it, and instead put them on the path of just learning about their child and learning about resources and trying to and finding joy where you have it right in front of you, and help them avoid some of the detours that I took on that path, which is, of course, how the Scenic Route as a concept came to be. The whole woo-woo medicine thing that I got caught up in for a while, and not fully understanding the education system, even though I was a teacher. I didn't know ESE law. Why would I, and I just wanted to, anything that I would say to a new parent, I wanted to have it all in one book. And it was really inspired from a friend of mine, Christy, who had, when it was becoming very obvious that Callum was going to be something different, we didn't know what, we knew he was going to be Callum, but we didn't know what version. She had a child that was, had significant special needs. And I called her up and I was bawling And I said, I'm so sorry that I didn't call you more and volunteer to babysit more and let you go out. And, I was blubbering because I realized that I had not been a friend stepping up to the plate. But I had no idea how to step up to that plate or even that the plate needed that much stepping up to. I had no concept of it. She said, meet me at Chili's. And we went to Chili's and she sat me down and held my hand and she handed me this ring that had on it love life and on the inside be brave. And she said, this is the only way to go about it is you have to keep loving life. You can't be angry. What's your child going to be picking up on? You can't be sad. What's your child going to be picking up on? And you've got to grow some thicker skin right now, sister. That's the first thing she said. You are soft-hearted and you need to grow thicker skin. You're going to have to stand up for him when it's not even in your nature necessarily to be loud on behalf of yourself. And that was the same way spirit that I intended to approach it as is here's where you are. Okay, let's cry. Now let's breathe. And now let's move forward into some light while acknowledging that I still don't know everything. We're going into, we're kind of deep in the thick of adolescence here right now. But Callum is only 3 years now from somebody having to tell a court whether or not they think that I'm fit to take care of him. So we're going to be having to go through that in 3 years. And, he's getting to the point where he's bored around our house. At the same time, he is incredibly, mentally, his development is much like a 3-year-old, but physically and in other ways, he's a 15-year-old. And those two things take up space all in the same person. I guess they do for all of us, but it's extreme with him. And yeah, there's stuff coming down the line that I'm still talking to people who are further down the road than I am because I haven't gotten there. But I felt like I had at least reached the point of peace and getting past that attitude of why me or any of that kind of stuff, because they're honest emotions, but ultimately they're ugly ones that poison you and they may bleed through and be picked up on by your child. When she reached out to me, it was not long before the pandemic. And then I had both of the children home. And I signed that contract, I think about 3 weeks before everybody went on lockdown. So I had both children home doing the online schooling while working full time, while writing a book in a pandemic, while my husband was on the road and being a truck driver and gone many hours a day. And, I was falling apart just like everybody else and trying to write this book. So I think it made me feel for them even more. Like there's even more I have to say here, because please don't think that I'm just sitting here every day looking all dusted off and my house is perfectly neat. This laptop is currently propped up on a box and I'm turned to the side because I've been trying to redo this office and I haven't gotten around to it because I've been overwhelmed with things lately. Yep. And that's the reality, but all you have to do is love them. And there's a whole lot of extra stuff there, but accepting them is absolutely the first part.
Yeah.
I feel like I blathered there.
No. So one of the things I'll say is, your book, and I could tell from your writing style, reading it and stuff, like you're very humble and you'll point, and you do in your book point to other resources and everything, and you are very gracious to brag about the wonderful people in your life. But your book has very much been my Bible since I started reading it. And just the different perspectives that you give in the book and all the information and just loving them and loving your kids and the way to handle certain people, the things they say to you, the way they approach you. And I mean, it's how to react when your kid says this, how to, or doesn't say it, but has some kind of reaction to something. Again, just the Bible. And again, we've talked about, there's a reason why, this is just episode 3 of the 3rd season. It's because my wife, while she's very type A and is able to handle like things like setting up the appointments and setting up the therapies and stuff like that, I didn't really have my mind wrapped around, okay, what does autism really mean? Like, are we really facing, not just like wrapping our arms around, but facing what's to come for us with his autism, and how's it going to affect his brother who might have some kind of ADHD as well. We're not sure. And he's the younger one, so he looks up to his brother, so he's very much going to pick up. And I saw the beauty in that about your 16-year-old loving Callum, the younger one, and then to see later on in the book, you talk about the fact that, oh, we didn't pick up on it, that she was autistic as well. So there's just so much in this book that is like, oh my gosh, like it just kept feeding my soul and like make me emotional, but then give me strength. And I just loved every part of it. But there's
Thank you.
parts of the book that are derived from your blog. So that might have helped with the writing process, given everything that was going on with the pandemic and the kids being home. You could tell some of them were excerpts were from the book, or some of the excerpts of the book were from your blog, including some open letters that you put out there on your blog. You've also done your fair share of speaking at conventions and writing for other resources outlets and all that. Has there been any one specific letter or appearance that has been the most therapeutic for you, before this one, obviously? Um, and and has there been any kind of reaction given to you that was most surprising to you, based on anything you said or wrote? So what was the most therapeutic thing that you put out there, and what was like the most surprising reaction that you might have had, whether positive, negative? Because obviously there's all the different myths about autism, where it started from and all that. Like, um,
Right.
so what's most therapeutic, and what was your reaction that caught you by the most surprise?
The most therapeutic has been the private messages that have come in to me. Somebody sends a little shy friend request, or they'll like something that's a public post or two, and I feel like I've seen them before, and then they friend me, and I look at them, they seem to be legitimate, and then they reach out and send these long, you know, messages of yes, yours was lovely, and that was worth it right there. Just those that come in when people talk about those, it meant the world to me when Temple Grandin. I don't know if you are familiar with who she is, but you should be. You're going to have to be, because she is she's it of autism for sure. There's a wonderful book called Thinking in Pictures, which you need to read if you haven't. And they also turned that into a made-for-HTV movie with Claire Danes, who was amazing in it. And it is Temple Grandin's life story. She didn't speak till she was 4. She's now a doctor of farm animal science. I don't know the actual name for the degree. That's terrible. But she has a doctorate in it. And she's the one that discovered this amazing contraption that comforted her by squeezing her in tight when she was overwhelmed at night. I think she was saying in her dorm. And she realized, you know what, I have something in common with how I perceive the world that some of these animals here do. And she ended up being the person who created the path chute system for cows that is used by something like 60% of meat processing plants. It is a humane way to lead cattle to slaughter by squeezing them as they go through, which is a comforting thing. And her attitude is, if we're going to eat meat, we must be kind to the creatures that we take it from. And, that was like her whole thing. And she started doing speaking and that sort of thing. And I would say, I mean, autism has been around a lot longer than Temple Grandin, but she's the mother of autism in terms of how how typical people became able to perceive the world of an autistic person. And she's amazing. But she read my book and wrote a blurb for it. And that was the scream that carried 3 counties right there. I'd been able to meet her briefly in like a book signing thing once, but that was like a thrill. And the most unexpected thing was when people from Poland and Turkey began to reach out, because I have no idea why. My book was a modest little book. And it was published in Poland and Turkey. And so there were some people who spoke more than one language, thankfully, because I don't, who sent me messages, and just that it's the same experience the world over, that every parent's heart, all their fears and concerns and everything that they love and hold special about their children on the spectrum is amazing. And I did get to hear from autistic adults who told me, you know what, normally I like people listening to autistic adults the most about autism, nothing about us without us and all of that. But if it's going to be a parent talking to, typicals, I like this. This is the version I like. And I was like, okay, fair enough. There's a little division, some in the community, about parents of autistic children and adults speaking and autistic people themselves speaking. So it's just something you kind of have to be sensitive of.
I kind of admittedly don't have a lot of knowledge on the topic. But as part of kind of the preparation for the conversation, did some research and touched on, kind of some different news outlets that had information. With it being Autism Awareness Month, are there any, I guess, perceived facts or anything like that you wish to kind of dispel as myths? That
Sure.
the common person like me that's looking to learn about the topic would see this and assume that what you read is correct or accurate or whatever it might be. Are there anything like that? Is there anything like that you see all the time and it's frustrating, or anything like that you kind of want to dispel as a myth for the group?
Yes, definitely. Well, one of them is that you hear a lot of people say, well, back when I was a kid, they threw a fit like that. You just whooped them real good and they weren't autistic anymore. I've heard that one. And I've heard that one in rooms where I've been actually the facilitator doing a presentation on autism. So, that was fun. Ooh, but there is an attitude of that. They don't understand the difference between a child's tantrum and somebody who is really completely overwhelmed and having a meltdown. Mm-hmm. Somebody having a meltdown is no more in control of that than they are if they're having a seizure, which, by the way, there are a large number of people with autism who also are epileptic. So there's so many things that are connected, but you can no more, you can't just say stop having a seizure and you can't say stop having a meltdown. It does not work like that. Right. So that would be one. The second one would be all of the snake oil being sold to parents across the autism spectrum. There's a wonderful book by my friend Steve Silberman, I would say this is the epic history of autism and neurodiversity. It's the one, the Bible of it. And, autism has gone all the way back in history. You can find descriptions back with the Romans and the Greeks. It's always been, and there are any number of names throughout painters and classical musicians and writers that if you go back and you look at their childhood history and their behaviors, there's a reason why there's this. It's tied, the bell curve, which you guys have seen whenever you're looking at it, 100's right here.
Mm-hmm.
The bell curve, it looks a little bit different for autism. The ends, when they come down here, they tip up again. You've got far more geniuses in with autism, but you also have far more severely cognitively disabled people. So it's a little like this with it, and then they tip.
Okay.
And so a lot of people think, well, all this must have happened because of vaccines, because this didn't happen till the time my child was 2 years old, and that's when they got such and such a vaccine. 2 years old is approximately the time in which autism is going to become evident to others. It is not that somebody goes to the doctor one day, they get a vaccine, and they're autistic the next day. It doesn't happen like that. It's a coincidence in timing of a doctor looking for developmental markers and parents looking for those things, and then this coincidental thing that happens. Autism, oh my gosh, we found so many genes for autism now. There is a wonderful organization that has sought to share the DNA of autistic people, their siblings, and their parents throughout the United States. And what they did was they sent out free DNA test kits. All you had to do was sign up for it. And then they put them all together. And then that bank, instead of all of these individual hospitals, instead of, Johns Hopkins or, any other hospital I'm not thinking of right now, the big ones, all of them having to gather their own test folks and their own DNA, they're now sharing this DNA across the United States. And that was Spark for Autism, and it's a wonderful thing. I'm a member of it, and since they started that, there have been so many discoveries. Autism is going to end up being a lot like, I don't want to compare it to cancer because it's not an illness that can ultimately kill you. It is, but what people tend to think of it is one disease that's in all different places in the body, when it's not. It's hundreds of different diseases that are all over the body that all are going to have their own individual, treatments for one day. Well, autism, all these brains are forming differently, and they're forming differently for different reasons and in different ways. So there are going to be a lot of reasons for it. But people tend to try to, that saying, causation and correlation is a big deal. Just because something is connected doesn't mean it's a cause. Perfect example would be that there are more diagnosed autistic children born near underpasses than there are not. Well, there aren't big underpasses in small rural cities. They are in large cities where you have tons of resources and bigger schools with bigger resources. Guess which children are going to be diagnosed more quickly? That's the correlation. But a whole bunch of people read that headline that the news puts out, and it makes it sound like if you live near, an underpass, your child's going to be autistic. It's just not true. So don't listen to that. That's a big one I would say, is do not listen to the snake oil. There's a lot of it out there. And I encountered one of the most greatly known snake oil salesman that if you read the whole book, then you read about the doctor that I mentioned in it, who ended up becoming his own true crime TV episode on another network. But I bought into it, hook, line, sinker, and don't fall for that. I would say those would be the big ones.
So I have a question real quick, and Dustin, if this throws you off, I apologize. But
No, go for it, man.
Lee, as we've been talking, um, a lot. So you've brought up frequently about diagnosis, and with your son, it was early. With your daughter, it's been later. And so it seems like it's in a very important part of the process. So as far as the diagnosis goes, why do you feel that is such a almost a major milestone to helping to successfully get everybody on the same page or know exactly how to proceed? Or why do you feel that the diagnosis stage is so very important?
When you have a child that is first evidencing some of these tendencies, behaviors, characteristics, what you're looking down is this long hallway full of, some of the doors are open, but most of them are locked. Without a diagnosis, you have no key to enter those rooms.
Okay.
Without a diagnosis, you're not going into therapy. Even if they just give them, like initially, this happens a lot, is that in pre-K, around the age of 5, they'll call it pervasive developmental disorder, generalized, developmental disorder. They'll give it different names like that. Until they finally nail it down later on is really what that means, until everything kind of presents itself. But if you don't have that, you're not going to have access to the services in the school system, which would be speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, some behavioral therapies, which can be controversial. I do not like certain kinds, and I do like other kinds, and I won't go too much into that because, we don't have all day, but be careful what you select when you are looking for behavioral therapy and things that are really going to help, because the idea is you want therapy that's going to teach your child is what you're looking for. But you don't have that. And I think that if you send your child off to school and they're going through first grade and second grade and third grade, and they are perceived as the weird kid in the room, you've really failed by not taking advantage of a law that is true. Little kids, when you get them sitting around on the floor for story time and you share with them a book about this boy and how he's different and what it is that makes him different, and mom's sitting there and let the kids ask some questions, and somebody raises their hand and says, so these are the things that he or she might need help with, and he needs friends for that, and sometimes people are afraid of being friends. Is there anybody here who would like to be his friend? 25 little hands will shoot up in the air. And I'll tell you, these middle school kids these days, they don't think anything at all about autism. They already know because they have been introduced to so much of it. Their friends, oh yeah, I got a friend, he's on gaming. Listen to me, I know nothing about gaming. I say he's on gaming. But I know they talk to each other for hours playing games in like dark rooms, for hours. But they have tons of friends who are doing that, and a lot of young people think nothing of it. I will have students in adult ed that'll introduce themselves to me now. 18-year-olds who'll say, well, I was diagnosed on the autism spectrum. I also have OCD, and I'm okay until, and then they'll describe the really specific thing that they have trouble with. They're very aware, and they will advocate for themselves. If you can get kids on the side of your child, they're set for life. I've seen kids in the 8th grade who were presented their classmate in such a way throughout elementary school that they always looked out for him. And now he's probably 20 years old. And all these high school friends from cheerleaders and football players and everyone are like, way to go. And you see it. And that's beautiful. And you can make that happen if you make your child's path go easier. You can't do that without a diagnosis. You can always undiagnose them. All you have to do is go to any psychiatrist. You could lie, you could minimize, you could get an undiagnosis and tell the world, well, it was a mistake if you wanted to. You're not even required to tell people you have autism. So if your child is known to have autism in school and that helps them get through school, fabulous. If they happen to have difficulty with note taking and could use a note taker, which is something that colleges can do, and the counselor there at the college can make that happen, they don't have to walk in and announce to the whole world, I'm autistic. They can just make friends like anybody else. You don't have to carry it around with you to use that tool, to have it in your toolbox. But it's a terrible mistake to wait too long, because the ability to develop language and to improve upon upon how a child perceives communication can be worked on the younger they are. Don't wait till they're 12 and it's virtually set in stone. And now you've got a kid who will never speak in sentences, but could have held an iPad to go, I want cheeseburger with fries. Because the thing is, you don't know yet in the beginning with your child that is autistic before they're speaking. Even if they are speaking a little, you don't know yet what the degree of language disability is going to be. If you don't start that now, you are eliminating virtually every choice that a possibly nonverbal child in the future could ever be given by not giving the ability to make a choice. Whether that's with pictures or whether that's with sign language or that's with talking, talkies that talk for children, whatever it is. I can't imagine any worse hell on earth than to be someone who cannot even express that they don't want mashed potatoes on their plate. Like, that's what chokes me up. And you don't know in the beginning. You need every tool. Anything else is your fear, your possible embarrassment, your not willing to pull your head out of the sand and look at reality. But your job is to do what every parent knew they were willing to do when they became a parent, which is step through fire for your child. And to do that, you got to suit up and get ready for it. So you got to do that early. You can't wait till late.
So good.
Brandon, awesome question. And Leigh, great explanation about getting diagnosed early. So one of the things my wife and I are faced with right now, we're staring down the barrel of, is my son is in his second year of preschool. He is in a 50-50 combined class and getting preschool, second year preschool, and just getting ready for kindergarten. We have a IEP appointment coming up. So I guess the question would be, one, I know the wait list to get diagnosed pretty much anywhere, especially in the United States, is typically long. Some people are looking at over a year to get that appointment just to get diagnosed for autism, have that appointment, well, to have them tested, and then you're waiting for the results. And then two, trying to make sure you're going into an IEP meeting, where my wife is kind of like, we're both concerned. We're very focused on making sure he is given an IEP, that we don't want him to be thrown into a class next year like, oh, well, we didn't see any signs really of him being, neurotypical in school, where you're having those issues at home, but he's generally fine. Like, we want to make sure that he's getting the IEP he needs, because another issue, perceived issue, I guess I could say, is because our son is black. He's an adopted son. We don't want him to then get pigeonholed into like, oh, well, he's the problem child. He's the one that's misbehaving, and seem like we're putting up a race card by any means. So, what kind of advice do you have for people maybe to get their kids in a diagnosed maybe quicker if there's a way? Any loopholes you might know of to get them diagnosed quicker, as well as what kind of approach we should have as we're, just a couple weeks away from the IEP meeting?
Right. The first thing that I would do is educate myself on the different kinds of diagnoses. There's a wonderful book. It is my IEP Bible. if we're throwing around different kinds of Bibles for our purpose, that's mine, and it is called From Emotions to Advocacy by Wright's Law. And everything you need to know to navigate the school system, IEPs, diagnosis, accommodations, everything is in that book. Buy it, get highlighters and sticky notes. It took me about 2 weeks to go through it, reading chapters at night, and highlighting everything. But that's the best education I've ever gotten, was that one book. There are parent information centers in most states. I am friends with someone who used to run the Parent Information Center in Ohio, but she left to become an analyst. But I know that there is one there, and they will provide all sorts of information for parents as well. But what you have to keep in mind is there are two different kinds of diagnoses. There's an educational diagnosis, and that is separate from a medical diagnosis. An educational diagnosis is made when a school believes that these characteristics of this child can inhibit their learning, can affect their learning. If they see somebody who is incredibly bright, acing everything, and maybe is only having some social skills problems, they may not give your child an autism diagnosis, even though that child may be standing in front of you just like Sheldon Cooper, who it's blatantly clear. And I'm sure, had Sheldon been a real child, he would have experienced some loneliness and some sadness and things like that. He would have been a weird little kid. They do not pay as much attention to the aspect of social communication. If you have a child that is considered high functioning, which is the term that they like to use, which basically means that they're going to function well in a classroom environment and learn. But if you have a child that is suffering from the social communication issues, and those are big. I mean, my daughter, when she was 9, she had a social communication score of 18 years old in language. She had a high vocabulary, friendly, chatty, sweet, loved to talk to people. But her social language development was around 6 years old. And that's when that gap was starting to spread. And it can become really painful. It gets more painful into middle school, into the beginning of high school. So you want to understand that they may not necessarily give you the same diagnosis a doctor will. And just because you get a diagnosis from a doctor does not mean that they will take that diagnosis and consider it for purposes of school. So you got to fight your way through that. You've got to prove what those things are. And to do that, you got to have all your ducks in a row. I would highly, highly recommend that you sit down together and read that book, and it's going to blow your mind. Wright's Law has all kinds of things. They're wonderful. But navigating the two diagnoses, I will tell you that my sincere belief is that the medical one will get the attention of the folks in the school for the educational one, but a lot of times the teachers notice something and they just haven't followed up on it. You have a right as a parent to request any evaluation for any learning condition that you are worried about. And I would absolutely go ahead and request those. They must do them within a certain amount of time. of them being requested. So that can be a great first way, but follow that up by getting your name on the long list.
Okay. And
You know, you want to have that.
is there a double jeopardy when it comes to asking the school to do another assessment? So your child assessed and say, no, doesn't need IEP. Like you can request it again.
No. And if you have a doctor, if you get yourself a psychiatrist who send you or if you typically they'll send you to a neuropsychiatrist or a developmental pediatrician. Typically they're going to make some specific things that you can take back in as your examples to use. And you want that. When I finally learned, I took in my own personal physical therapist, own personal speech therapist, own personal behavioral therapist, and occupational therapist who happened to be the director of a rehab center. And I had a parent advocate with me. I'm a lawyer's child. By that point, I'd sort of learned I'm going to go and eliminate any possibility that he is not going to get the services that he needs. I'm going to stop any argument that can be made. You don't have to drag everybody in to do that. But having all that paperwork, having the epic binder, I used to call it the binder of epic proportions that I carried with me everywhere. Having that kind of stuff is beautiful. And the teachers that are sitting there, not necessarily the person who has to approve the funding for whatever it is you're suggesting, but the teachers that are sitting there, please know they're sitting there quietly and they are cheering you on inside. And they are going back to lunch and saying, oh my gosh, this kid's parents stepped up. He came in. He's going to fight. And you don't always have to fight a school. The school, it's not that they want to deprive, but they just don't always know. They don't always have, they don't take you in for a class on autism when you get a degree in education, unless you're a special ed teacher. Mm-hmm. That's it. But you have autistic kids in every classroom. Yeah. So the teachers aren't being educated in it. The curriculum isn't designed for it. And, you have to be their advocate, but you can be a very strong one and you can look and play the part and know all your stuff even better than the person sitting at the end of the table. Mm-hmm. You can. And again, I would never vilify schools. I'm a teacher. I love schools. But don't walk in there thinking that they've got his best interest in heart and that they're going to put him in the place where he should be put. They don't have money. We have mandates all across this country to provide services for children, and then we've not funded it. Mm-hmm. So they've got a certain amount of money to go around, and this chunk of that money would only go to your child specifically, and it wouldn't go to these others because their parents didn't quite step up. That's how it works. Mm. And sometimes it's like looking out at a bunch of ships that are going down, and you got to swim to the one your child's on. I mean, that's how it sometimes is, especially I think in rural areas that lack some of those resources. Again, good intentions, they just don't know.
Mm-hmm. And you covered it beautifully in that fight within the school system, how torn you felt because you were part of the school system and who you're going to battle with and stuff, that you weren't trying to ruffle any feathers, that you weren't trying to lose your job, that you weren't trying to get people turned against you, and yet somehow you felt some of the negativity that was perceived and put towards you and stuff, just from people talking, because there's always the three-side story: what happened, or what you said happened, what they said happened, what truly happened, and how much that can play effect in it. But you cover that beautifully, that inner turmoil and how it came about existentially. So
it was traumatic. It was absolutely traumatic. I mean, outside of the death of my father, that had to have been the most difficult time of my life. I mean, I live in a, I don't live in a town, but it's a small city,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, everybody knows each other somehow, and yeah, that was painful. That hurt, but eventually, we got each other's sides, and I think they understood where I was coming from,
Mm-hmm.
and started to bring me on board to do some trainings and things like that for them. And it got to the point where everybody knew that, if something goes wrong with Callum,
Yeah.
we're going to take care of it. And I don't mean that in a triumphant way. I just mean that you can become that parent too, but you don't have to be ugly to do it. Going and trying to, send a letter to the principal, cussing up a storm about your child's teacher and wanting to have their teaching certificate taken away from them because they didn't follow the IEP. That's not how you go about this.
Mm-hmm.
You are, I mean, it's a little bit like tearing apart the team that's about to take you into surgery.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to do that.
Yeah.
They're going to have your child.
Yeah.
So you got to figure out how to do this and play the game a bit, even though I don't think they think of it as a game, but in some ways you got to go in prepped for it.
Absolutely, teamwork. Yep.
Absolutely. There's a lot of politics in all of that. And all of it comes down to there not being enough money. All of it.
Yeah.
Nobody is sitting at a school district saying, we want to deprive this kid of speech therapy if he needs it. I mean, there's just no evil villain doing that. But there is somebody down there whose superintendent wants, say, they're trying to build this new wing over here, and you've got a problem because you've got a potential lawsuit on your hands.
Yeah.
There's that guy, and I feel sorry for him, but I got to worry about my son first.
Right.
Now, the idea behind Family by Heart is that families are created in many different ways. Obviously, my family via foster care or adoption. Brandon has his 2 older kids, via, traditional ways. You have peoples that have their fur babies. There's a whole autism community, obviously, that you express your gratitude for in the book. But what does family mean to you?
Family is, if you're fortunate in life, the people that you are born around will be a wonderful family to you. And when I say born around, either delivered to or, delivered of, one or the other. But if you're lucky in life, if you're fortunate, that's going to be what you're going to have. But it's not the case for everyone. And a lot of people want to tell you, oh, these special children, God only gives special children to special people. They love to say that. Well, I'm here to tell you, there have been special children born and wrapped in bags and put in dumps behind buildings. There have been autistic children who have been tortured by their caregivers, both biological and not. Family is obviously going to be the people who love you and the people who step up and show up immediately when anything is wrong. You're absolutely right to watch out for your son. There, statistically, children who are Hispanic, who are Black, who are Asian, are diagnosed less. I can't give you an exact reason for it. I could give you some opinions, especially here in the South, but I don't know. I don't know if we're not doing a good enough job educating people, but they're represented across the autism spectrum equally amongst all races. That, people used to think that it was in the early 90s, they used to think that it was the disorder for rich white people. Well, that wasn't the case. That was because rich white people were the first people going to these specialty doctors and getting these diagnoses that were going on 20/20 and 60 Minutes and everything. But it's always been happening. It's always happened. But you have to watch out, and you certainly, if you have a child who is in any other disenfranchised group, potentially, you got to watch out for them even more. And I think I forgot the actual question you asked me.
No,
So sorry.
definition of family. I think you
Yeah,
represented
You
it
nailed it.
well, saying like how it's the people that will fight for you and represent you, care for you. So
exactly it. That's exactly it. I don't have very much blood family anymore other than my children and some cousins and an uncle. Not very many at all. My family are the people that I have been wise enough in life to select and put around me, and and that's who you count on. And I love the idea of this because that's exactly right. It is family by heart.
and one last thing, because I believe you also went into family is you love them and accept them as they are. And I had asked
Yes.
you a little bit beforehand. Towards the end of your book, you wrote a beautiful poem about if there was a cure for autism tomorrow. And I asked you specifically to share it at the end of the thing because I know I'm gonna I'll probably be a blubbering idiot afterwards. But it was just so beautiful and moved me. So if you wouldn't mind sharing
Sure.
that wonderful poem.
Absolutely. If you were cured tomorrow, if you were cured tomorrow, life would be easier for you. You could eat without ritual, go anywhere without fear, and would understand everything being said, even when it isn't being said. If you were cured tomorrow, people wouldn't stare. Your play would not be questioned and corrected. You wouldn't feel compelled to move and shout and seek in the ways that you do. Instead, you would sit in rooms where people talk to you instead of about you. If you were cured tomorrow, I would ask you to explain so many things. If you were cured tomorrow, you would gain better access to all those beautiful dreams we wished for you before we knew you. But if you were cured tomorrow, you would be a stranger to me, living a stranger's dream, and I would never get to see you live the dreams you have for yourself. If you were cured tomorrow, my worries would be eased, but my heart would be broken because I love you, you, not some hypothetical you, not the you might have been had you not turned out to be you. It's all very complicated and it's all very simple. If you were cured tomorrow, I'd miss you. Which I think kind of sums up everything about that love that you have, you know. They are who they are, and he would not be who he is without this. He'd be a
Exactly.
different, a different child.
Exactly. So, again, Leigh, thank you so much. I honestly could pick your brain for hours and hours and hours.
Anytime.
Yeah, well, I trust me. I'm sure I'm going to be taking advantage of this relationship that we've created here. You're part of the family by heart now. You're part of the family. I'm so
Thank
thankful for
you.
you. I'm thankful for your book. I keep saying it's my Bible. I've already recommended it to so many people. I feel bad. A little omission here. I've held on to my copy from the library for so long. I keep telling other people, you gotta check this book out. You gotta check this book out. Except for I'm bogarting like the only well, not the only, but this particular copy. I'm like, okay, I need to just buy the thing as well as look into other things. And then also, like I saw, I think one of the books you mentioned earlier that you received uh, a signed copy of recently, and your post was just beautiful about like, well, you gotta get this book too. I'm not gonna give you my copy because I've already lost 3 copies of it, but you gotta get this book.
Yeah.
So I gotta get my own copy and probably get some other copies to pass out to some people. But it's such a wonderful book. You're such a wonderful person. It
Thank
really has
you.
been a Bible for me and things for so much information, whether you have kids or family members are autistic or not. If you're just someone like Brandon that is open and wanting to be aware and learn more about it because maybe some friends or family have autistic people, it's just such a great resource. And it's full of other resources on there for people to check out. So definitely everyone check out the Scenic Route, Embracing the Detours, Roblox, and Unexpected Joys of Raising an Autistic Child. Leigh, again, I want to be respectful of time, so I'll be sure to post your socials and all that stuff. Again, just
Thank
thank you
you.
so much from the bottom of my heart.
Absolutely. This was fun. Thank you so much. Nice to meet you, Brandon, and good to see you, Dustin. Thank you for reaching out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Appreciate
Alrighty.
it.
Bye-bye.
And there you have another episode in the books. And you heard Leigh's definition of family, and there are many different definitions of family. But the most important thing to remember is your family is who's there to support you. Your family is who is there to love you unconditionally. Because we are born into our names, but we become family by heart.